Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody. Hello, relatives. We thank you for joining our first OCMPAC's Racial, Indigenous, and Social Justice Speaker Series conversation. And today, our topic is going to be connections and experiences to salt water. All right. So we will be offering first a land acknowledgement. Orange County is within the unceded traditional homelands of the Ahachimum and Tongva peoples. The Ahachimum share territory with their relatives and neighbors, the Tongva to the north and south to Newport Beach, as well as the Payumpuichum to the east and south. These native peoples are still here and operate as tribal nations with international relationships, though their homelands continue to be occupied in violation of their sovereign nationhood. OCMPAC pays respect to and honors the original stewards of what is now known as our Orange County, the Ahachimum and the Tongva peoples, past, present, and future. And I would also like to acknowledge the lands, the waters, the minerals, the plant and animal relatives with much gratitude. We are going to go ahead and turn this over to Lana so we could talk about OCMPAC.
Thanks, Tina. So I'm Lana. I'm the past chair for OCMPAC, and I wanted to share a little bit about what OCMPAC is and who we are. So the Orange County Marine Protected Area Council, or OCMPAC, is a collaboration of city, county, and state officials, academic faculty, nonprofit organizations, and other community members who share an interest in protecting and increasing awareness of Orange County's marine protected areas, or MPAs, and other coastal marine resources. Our mission with OCMPAC is to preserve and protect Orange County's coastal resources through ongoing improvements in research, monitoring, education, outreach, and enforcement. A lot of the great work that we're doing with OCMPAC happens at a committee level. We're comprised of different committees, including grants, research and monitoring, education and outreach, compliance, and racial, indigenous, and social justice. And we have a brand new student committee that's just getting going. Our current members are made up of state and local government agencies, environmental nonprofits, universities, community members, and others. Everyone, not just members, are welcome to attend OCMPAC meetings and events and participate in committees. Members can hold leadership positions and vote on decisions, but both organizations and individuals are eligible to become voting members of OCMPAC. If you would like to become a member, I'm still on slide 4, Tina. If you want to go back a slide for me. So this speaker series is currently being hosted by the Racial, Indigenous, and Social Justice Committee. The goal of the OCMPAC's RISJ speaker series is to educate OCMPAC member organizations and others involved in MPA access and education on historical and contemporary issues related to coastal access in Orange County. This series will intentionally center the experiences of Indigenous and other Black, POC, LGBTQ, and disabled speakers in accessing MPAs and coastal beaches in Orange County. Next slide now. Oh, here we are. Okay, sorry, back one slide. OCMPAC is one of 14 MPA collaboratives across the state. If you can go back one slide, Tina, I'm sorry. Getting confused with the notes, but so we're part of one of 14 MPA collaboratives across the state. Together, these collaboratives share resources within each county and across the state for an even greater impact on MPA stewardship. Okay, now next slide. And we're always looking for more ways or for more people to become involved. And there's several different ways you can get involved. The easiest and quickest way is to join our mailing list, which is a great way to keep up to date on news and upcoming events and meetings. If you aren't already on that mailing list, you can sign up on our website, which is listed right here. You can also attend a general meeting, which is part of the reason why you guys are here. Well, no, sorry, that's another way you can get involved. So general meetings are for full OCMPAC membership, but also for anyone who's interested in learning more. And there's also ways to get involved at the committee level if you guys are interested in any of those 5 committees that I listed off. And then finally you can become a member. Thank you. Back to you, Tina.
Thank you. Thank you, Lana. Sorry, my computer is very touchy, so it's going back and forth. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce to you today's panelists. They're all amazing speakers. We have Adriana Guerrero, which is with Salted Roots. We have Jules Jackson with Coastal Defenders. And we have Jessa Calderon as Chumash Paddler. And we're going to start with Adriana. Adriana, here's her bio. She is the current executive director of Salted Roots, formerly operating as Brown Girl Surf. Adriana's work and passion includes working to build a more inclusive surf culture, both locally and nationally, through community programming, collaboration with ally organizations, and advocacy for equitable and inclusive coastal policies, all while centering joy as a form of community building and healing. A common thread that weaves Adriana's professional aspirations and beliefs together is their pursuit of social justice with the youth development lens and community-based approach. Over the last decade and a half, they have worked in a variety of capacities in the nonprofit sector across the globe with communities ranging in their socioeconomic, cultural, and language backgrounds. Recently, in recognition of their impact contributions, Adriana was recently awarded and acknowledged by Sachamama on the 100 Most Influential Latinos list, a prestigious accolade supported by various organizations. And Adriana has included their website there. So I do encourage everybody to click on that at some point and get to know a little bit about Adriana. Adriana, I have a few questions for you. And I was curious if you could share with us what draws you to the ocean and how you got started with surfing.
Wow. What draws me to the ocean? That's a pretty big question because I think one of the things that is really special about my time with Salted Roots is that how much my relationship with the ocean has transformed and grown and blossomed over the last 4 years. And so, how I first started surfing was I grew up on Long Island. I actually never surfed. I didn't know anyone who surfed. And I think that speaks to the volumes of just accessibility and like who you know. It actually wasn't until I was in my mid-20s when I actually put on someone else's wetsuit and got on a surfboard and even got into the ocean in that capacity. And I was thousands of miles away from where I had grown up. So my story is actually not uncommon in our community, right? Like always being on the peripheral to surfing and like mainland and the way that surfing has been portrayed in media and white culture. So really my surf journey began when I started working at Brown Girl Surf, now Salted Roots. And I think forever I'm super grateful for that. And I think through the community and my team, it has really transformed how I am in the ocean, in relation with the ocean, and really seen as being in the ocean and surfing in all the different ways, you know, whether it's tandem surfing, boogie boarding, or body surfing, it's really something to be experienced in community. And there's so much joy behind it and how we all in various of my cultures growing up and different cultures within our community, there's a lot of religious connection for folks in our community and how we share this common love and bond to the ocean is something really unique and special.
Thank you for that. And I had another question for you, because now you're the ED of Salted Roots. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you'd like us to, or you'd like to share with us around your connections to orgs and people with shared interests?
In what capacity? Just through the work?
Yeah, because I know you've done a whole lot as ED. You mentioned that you had just come back from what was it, a advocate workshop or something. So yeah, your connections, I'm sure, are pretty deep. And if there's just anything you'd like to share with your experiences there.
Yeah, I think coming into this role, even the work, I think since I've been with the organization, which I think it's really been a gift and an honor to be alongside in the work with both learning from peers, but I think a really big thing about my work has been like working from youth and elders in the ocean justice space and movement in general. And so I think that for me, I'm in this position and title, and I think oftentimes I'm I don't like the title executive director exactly. I always joke and say I don't have the executive direction. I think a lot of the work that we do as a team, and even today as an example of that, is very collective and collaborative. And so that is something that I've been very fortunate being in this role, is that I have had the opportunity to be with people all across the country. And I think it's so amazing that I'm here in this virtual space with Coach Jackson. And I just met her in person in an advocacy workshop in Sacramento. And that doesn't often happen. It's usually vice versa. You're working with people virtually. And so I think that's something that I'm very grateful for this role, the opportunity and the honor that I've had to be in spaces with folks who have been doing this work for a very long time. And I think that yeah, it's a huge honor to be in this space and to even be in this conversation. So that I'm very grateful for.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And yes, that'll help us to segue into Coach Jackson. So Coach Jackson is Nanticoke, which translates to the Tidewater people. She's dedicated her life to leveraging her background in coastal policy to help Indigenous nations, communities, and people reclaim their land and water stewardship birthrights. Coach is the founder of Coastal Defenders, an environmental, social, and restorative justice organization dedicated to creating equitable pathways in STEAM, aquatics, and environmental stewardship. And she supports the Tribal Marine Stewards Network in her role as TMSN Marine Stewards Catalyst. And Jules also shared their website. So welcome, Jules. Coach Jackson, I know you prefer.
Whichever. You're not one of my middle schoolers, so please feel free to use my adult name.
I did have a question for you though, because I think we're all kind of curious where that coach title comes from. Can you share a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. My background is actually in military and athletics, and so I've been an athletic coach off and on for about 20 years. So a lot of times, if you just say my name, folks won't know who that is. Two of the specific sports that I've always coached are field hockey and track and field. I think everyone thinks due to my height and size, it's basketball and volleyball. You do not want me to be on either one of those teams. But yeah, that's where it comes from.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so you come from the Tidewater people, and I was curious, have you always had a deep connection to water?
Thank you for that question. I think just like Adriana was saying, my relationship with the water has evolved. Growing up, I had a very dichotomized relationship with the ocean, having mixed ancestry. My father's Indigenous, so we have African ancestry, and my mother's white. So my father's relationship with the water was due to them being displaced from the water due to segregation. So our ancestral homelands and waterways weren't accessible to his generation. So a part of my relationship with the water was reclamation. And then that also framed why my relationship with the water was more colonized growing up and more extractive. With on my mother's side of the family, they have the privilege, they walk onto the beach and don't think twice about looking over their shoulder. They know everyone will look like them. They feel safe. They have access to all sorts of spaces. And I always grew up inherently thinking that wasn't fair. So for me, my relationship with the water is inherently intertwined with the concepts of justice and access. And I'm grateful in the last 10 years as I decolonize all facets of my life and specifically my relationship with the water and meeting wonderful people like your daughter, Jessica, that have helped me along the way and reconnect with the water as medicine.
I love that. And that was kind of the next segue too, because I was curious what led you to create the organization of Coastal Defenders. I think you just explained a little bit of that, but what was the driving force that pushed you to have that org?
When I was younger, my father would take us by one specific beach and point out that that was the only beach that they were allowed to go to. So I spent about the last 20 years advocating for the acknowledgement of those spaces, specifically through the placement of historical markers and where he had to attend segregated school, and then also in the beach uh, and ocean spaces. So even when I was little, I just told myself I would grow up and rectify this harm, repair this harm. And that's why Coastal Defenders isn't simply advocacy for the environment. I'm a firm believer that we cannot separate ourselves from our plant and animal relatives and the ocean. We're all intertwined. We have this incredible honor and responsibility to ensure um, that everyone and everything is protected, and we can't talk about one without the other.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, now we're going to go to Jessa. I can switch the screen over. There she is. Okay, so Jessa is a Tongva, Chumash, and Uema songwriter, poet, hip hop artist, performer, hypnotherapist, massage therapist, and energy worker who also offers guided meditations. Jessa is also a paddler with her Chumash relatives. By offering tools, Jessa encourages our community and youth to find their healing mentally, physically, and spiritually through her words, music, and practices. Jessa has worked with community and youth from many nations, helping them find themselves while helping them to feel good about themselves. And Jessa also shared her website. So welcome, Jessa. Thank you for being able to join us because I know you're traveling a bit and how to find a spot to connect. And what I'd like to do is give you the opportunity to share your most recent accomplishments, specifically around music and writing.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You cut out.
Yeah, if you can share with us your most recent accomplishments around your music and writing.
Oh, my music. Well, the very last song that I wrote, it's like a pump up song for boxing. My son has recently joined boxing, and the gym that he trains at was talking about how they wanted a song specifically for their gym, and I happened to have one sitting in my notes, so I recorded it for them. But the thing that I'm pushing out the most right now, aside from music, is my book Sisterhood, which took me many years to accomplish, officially published. And I'm just going around right now. That's where I recently came from. Why I had to stop halfway is promoting that.
Thank you. And then a question I had for you. What is your connection to water, both salt and fresh water?
I think you will chuckle when I talk about how I was just a little girl jumping in ice water, in fresh ice water. I've always felt a connection to the water. I've always, especially fresh and salt, not like so much a bathtub. But when you're around, when I am around water, I can feel the spirit of the water. I've always been able to, I want to say, communicate with that. To feel it, to hear it, to know it, you know, that spirit is just so beautiful, powerful, and healing, like extremely healing. So my whole life, I've been around water. We always knew what water not to touch, due to the fact that it was contaminated. And it was mostly my dad that would take us out into like these far out places away from the city, to these like water holes and waterfalls and streams, and you know, just really beautiful places where we would be able to connect. And then of course we're coastal people, being both Tongva and Chumash, and so as of, I want to say 2016, I started paddling with our Chumash paddlers out on the ocean. It might have been 2015, but it was, you know, my son was a little guy, and I guess I kind of feel a little bit pushed into it, but not, you know, anything bad. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful that my uncle told me that I needed to get my butt out there, because there's no words to describe being out on the ocean in a tumult, in a traditional wood plank canoe, you know, a little tiny boat, you know, at that, crossing to the islands, to our ancestral islands. There's no words that can describe it, but I'll try by using the word beautiful and honored.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to just dialogue a little bit between the three of you. Some of y'all kind of talked about how you know one another, which is, I think, it's really cool. And Adriana expressed, you know, kind of excitement about being in the panel with Coach Jackson. So knowing that you all kind of do know one another in a different kind of way, I was curious about how you feel about coming together to talk about your connections to and experiences to saltwater with one another. Anybody can take that.
I think it was quite serendipitous that Adrian and I, when we say we just met, I mean, we just met. I flew in last night. And so thank you for your love and kindness and breaking bread with you. And I think the way in which we meet each other is incredibly powerful, because the way I met Jessa was on the land. And I'm a pretty dominating person. I have a dominating personality that doesn't always align with Indigenous cultures. And I don't know if Jessa felt I did, but I really always listened to her. And in a variety of ways, I observe her interactions with other humans. I watch how she brings our plant family into her basket weaving when we're at events. I've been at places like the MPA Decadal Management Review, and Jessa was sitting front and center, I think, making her baskets. I'm not sure. I apologize if that's incorrect, if that's what we were doing it. My memory is a little foggy, but so it's not just, I think, like that we get to be in community together, but how. And it's really critical that we have these safe spaces, because the opportunity that Adriana and I had together recently I felt was pretty safe. I've been disabled for a year. The organization RLF got me a wheelchair. That was a huge deal, so I could be able to attend the event. It's a real challenge for me to travel. And so that's just the comment that comes to my mind is to have these opportunities where we're in settings where we have this common understanding of how we operate, what our value systems are, and that we feel that we're in a safe space to express ourselves.
Thank you for that. Jessa, do you want to answer that as well?
I had to put in my headphones. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think above all, just women representing the strength and love of the water, the necessities behind healing the water. I think that's a huge thing. So any way that we can uplift one another in the work that we do, I'm always going to be here for it. And I know other women, not just, you know, these women here, but when we get the opportunity to meet out on the ocean, I like to remind us all about the spiritual aspect. You know, for those of us who hold ceremony at the ocean, it's like an automatic that when you get to the ocean, not just for ceremony, but every time, is that you give thanks and ask for permission to even be there, you know? And so I think women tend to carry more of that understanding to do that offering. And so I'm just grateful. I'm grateful to see more and more women creating platforms to bring children and other women to the ocean.
Thank you. And Adrian, is there anything else you wanted to share around that?
Yeah, as I was thinking just of tonight's like theme around the connection and saltwater, and then after hearing both Jules and Jessa share, like two of the words that really stuck out to me was healing and reclamation. And there's a quote when I was reflecting, it's one of my favorite quotes. It's by Adrienne Marie Brown in The Pleasure of Activism. And I feel like this articulates best how I feel about like my relationship with the ocean, and also hearing you two share. Somewhere the saltwater of water sports and splashing in the sun became the saltwater of tears and transformation. And I think about that a lot. You know, tears not only can be a form of healing, it can also be tears of joy, tears of rage that our community has experienced since 2020 specifically, and how being at the ocean together has been really healing. And also making time for joy together, as well as what Coach Jackson has talked about, sharing her experience and her family about a reclamation of the beach. And that's also been our intention through our programming, is how do we literally take up space at the beach, you know, having 20, 25 people. When it was social distancing, we did program. It was so beautiful because it was literally, we were taking up space on the beach in order for it to be safe during physical distancing. And so that was really powerful to see, especially with our youth, you know, as well. And so it's like I had said before when I first spoke it, and it's really just like getting to hear more and learn more about Jessa, what you do, and Jules. It's really an honor, and to be able to connect, whether it was by chance, and I do believe in serendipity, and really Jules and I were at the opposite end of the room, and then we happened to sit like right next to each other at dinner. And I think that is really special to have done that. And what brings us to this space together is both of our love, all three of us, our love and our connection. And what you said, Jessa, also the communication, right? Whether it's the verbal or just that sense of the sensation and the feeling that I have and our community shares, it's really beautiful.
Thank you all for sharing that. Oh, I'm so excited. In our community, we say that the water, the ocean connects us, where sometimes land separates us. And so that it's really special to have all of you who have this deep connection. And so that you really want to dive into that a little bit deeper to allow you each to share your experiences with saltwater, anything that you want to share, whether it's access, whether, problems with access, or maybe you don't have the problems with access. Maybe you've created these relationships so that you can access certain beaches. But anything around the ocean, anything that really you want to share with our listeners that has impacted you in what you do around the saltwaters. Well, let's start with Adriana. We'll go in that same order.
Can I pass actually just to give a moment to process if anyone else feels ready?
I like the time to process too, but I'll go. As of recent, working with Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, it's really been reflecting on access and what that looks like, what that could look like, what that should look like. And we've learned that there are actual access points to the ocean that don't feel like access points, where we still feel kind of segregated from, and even community people, that live in such open spaces try to kind of gatekeep too, right? So it's really interesting trying to find the areas that are safe to just be. But one thing that we have talked about in community many a time and with Sacred Places Institute, it kind of came up around the MPAs and about what protection looks like. And it's amazing how through these MPAs as Indigenous peoples, we're like removed, right? So like we should be a part of the marine protected areas as Indigenous peoples, right? Like we are ocean people and we have every right. We should have every right to fish, to paddle, to swim, to pray, whatever our spirit needs for us to live and to survive and to thrive near that ocean. It should be a given right for our people without, paying for parking, without paying for access, So what we talk about around that is saying, just do it and we'll deal with the judges later, we'll deal with the officers later. And it could be scary and intimidating, but unfortunately, just the same way, we hear the stories about people who are gathering materials for their basket weaving or for their food, trying to stay traditional in a place where everybody wants to own everything, right? It just comes time to just say, what, I'm gonna just trespass, I'm gonna just do it, I'm gonna be illegal, what have you, so that we can thrive in our own culture. So I will go ahead and stop there and give space for somebody else.
Oh, I'm ready. Okay, thanks, Jessa, for jumping in. Yeah, I think something I'd like to share specifically about Salted Roots work is yes, we do surf programming, which is part of our work, but I think the other piece that we really focus on is through our advocacy work. And so we're working to not only create access for surfing in coastal, but we're also working to shift surf and beach culture and dismantle barriers to coastal access that are rooted in systems of colonialism, racial discrimination, and injustice. And so our advocacy work, both at the local and federal and local, state, and sometimes federal, is to ensure equitable beach access, whether it's through beach permitting, parking opportunities that are often inequitable because some parking passes you can use through state parks you can't use in other places that have local parking. And all of that is central to creating ocean spaces for all of our community to feel safe and benefit from the healing powers of the ocean and to play. And I think about one specific thing that we have been successful, although it did take some time, was locally the closest beginner break to us in Oakland is Lindemar State Beach, which is in Pacifica. And yes, now after about 6 years of advocacy work and nearly 2 decades of an illegal beach permitting system that they had there, we do have access to run our program, and other nonprofits do as well. But the issue that we are now addressing and hoping to really highlight through a campaign in the upcoming year is the water quality. It is, according to Heal the Bay, they do a Beach Bummers report. It's not a good report to be on because it's some of the poorest water quality, and that exists here in San Mateo County, and specifically Lindemar has the poorest water quality in all of the United States. And that is the closest beginner break for our communities. And that is not just here, right? Like, it's all throughout California. I know that's an issue for other organizations like us in Color the Water at Dockweiler. And then another organization, Umar de Colores, is working on the Tijuana River, right? And there's our community partner, Outdoor Outreach. They can't have programs at certain beaches because of the water quality and how unsafe it is. And it's not only for our participants, but my program team and families are concerned about the water quality and do not want to have their children and folks go in the water, and rightfully so. And so it's one thing to create access to go to the beach. There's also that literal health and quality of the water that we are in. And there's also the cultural component, right? What is the sense of welcoming and belonging also, right? I think that is something that is interesting in these conversations at the government level, the governor's level, as they do have the 30 by 30 and the access piece is part of it. But what does the environment look like when you are going to these spaces? What Jessa had explained, the gatekeeping, the localism that exists here and throughout California, the sense of entitlement, and oftentimes the violence that happens in and out of the water that are making these places unwelcoming for people in our communities. And so they only do find safety, physical, emotional, mental safety with our programs. And so that's something in addition to the work that we do through our SURF program, but it's also the the advocacy piece. I'll stop there.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, it is huge, everything you guys are saying. And I do want to give a quick shout out to OCMPAC and the fact that they're trying to change that narrative and having us to help to train the enforcement officers. And so much of it, and not only just protecting the MPAs, but also the fact that we're having this talk right now with our Racial Indigenous Social Justice Committee. So shout out to OCMPAC for trying to make those changes. And Coach Jackson, do you want to share anything, a deep dive into anything that has to do with your experiences?
Thank you. I think that I'm in a little bit of a different role than I am if I were to be on my homelands. I always say that my job is every day to work my way out of a job because I'm truly only here in service. I occupy Kumeyaay land. So I'm only here to provide the skill sets that I have, whether that's in my background with water safety and swim instruction and diving. It's all for the ultimate service of Kumeyaay folks and Payampatuquichin folks, any California Native folks, to reclaim their land and water stewardship. So I think while we're in this wonderful BIPOC space, I just want to acknowledge the important roles of those folks aspiring to be on the allyship or, to be accomplices, people that look like me, and the critical role that they have in having courageous conversations on the policy level, on the resources level, and having all of these critical conversations about accessibility. So I just wanted to touch base on, while it's important for us to share space just as ourselves, we can't do it all by ourselves. We have plenty of our own things going on, capacity, generational trauma, And we have to start taking these courageous stances for at least the last 4 years, if not longer. Many organizations, agencies, the state of California has identified tribal priorities, ways to move forward to include co-governance and co-management. And we need the people who have already had the privilege and the access and the resources to be in those rooms to take courageous stances, and not just once, not just twice. It's a continual journey. Allyship is never a place where you arrive, and I include myself in that.
Thank you all. A reminder to our listeners too, we're happy to take some of your questions and incorporate it into this talk. So there is a question. It says, how do you emotionally protect yourself and children you bring to the ocean from your presence being challenged by white people who see themselves as gatekeepers? So y'all touched on this a little bit, but what steps do you take?
I can, I have a group of Indigenous youth, about 15 youth in our Indigenous Leadership Youth Program, ILLI. I think a critical component is advanced preparation. I'm a little bit less concerned with how other people interact with us at the beach as I am with preparing the youth and listening to them and their priorities and their comfort levels, and understanding what their objectives are and what makes them feel safe first when they go into these spaces. And with same thing with other BIPOC folks, I think it's always a journey of actively listening and reflecting on the people who are most affected, because I see people that look like me all the time at the beach. It's not inherently my experience that is going to dictate how we interact with people. I'm a huge person of safety first, and it's taken 3 years just to even get the youth into the water, and that's fine, because I would rather them go into a space where they feel comfortable and have a wonderful environment, and my job is only to mitigate harm, not increase it. So between the advanced preparation of the youth, having their families involved, talking about their connection to the water, for me personally, I'd rather have the slow build than just push everyone to get out into these spaces that aren't always welcoming to them.
I think for, you know, our families and community, it always ends up being a learning and a teaching for the youth to see how to stand in your power and not back down, but also to carry yourself with respect and try to handle situations in a respectful way to the best of your ability. And it gives them tools really to move forward when they find themselves on their own taking those treks to the ocean. As far as the emotional aspect of it, it becomes conversation, you know. It's just something that we have to unpack after the situation is said and done. Give each other a safe space to cry, give each other a safe space to laugh, give each other a safe space to deal with the emotions that come up, however each of us deal with emotions, and to let it always be okay, however that might be, because some of us are angry, you know, some of us just, our emotions range, you know, from one to the other, and there is no wrong way. So ultimately it's just holding that space for our emotions to have an outlet, and then, you know, to, if possible, whenever possible, to end out in a prayerful way, to like really ground ourselves in the now, right? And be able to step away from that situation and leave that where it's at, but take the tools with us.
I can just add, for our programs, it's intergenerational. And so we do have youth specific program, but oftentimes our program are 9 and up. I think a lot of the times, because for some instances and for some folks, it's their first time at the beach. And so we like to share like expectations. So folks are really kind of know what it's going to be like when they get there. We have a lot of grounding and mindfulness also, and like checking in, and people might sharing just regardless of like who is around, but like how are they showing up in their body and how they're feeling. So we kind of have like a sense of how people are showing up. And there has been instances where people have said stuff, or I think it's important. It's not even what people verbally say. I think it's also the nonverbal is sometimes just as hurtful. And that has like intimidated me personally from like, should I get in the water? Right. And there's a lot of privilege that I have as, white passing, being mixed, femme passing. Like there's a lot of things that some of my youth wouldn't experience. And I just want to note that it's also the nonverbals that are also very unwelcoming. People won't say things right out loud. And I think there's also we can do as much as we can to be preventative and proactive. And so there's some skills and trainings that we've done. And what the team has done is a lot of work around de-escalation. And so it can be sometimes like us as staff were activated, or maybe the volunteers and the surf instructors. And so how are we caring for each other? And so what Jessa had said, like, how are folks feeling? Are people feeling angry? Or people want to cry? Maybe it's one person. And how do we hold space to debrief that as a group and how we've been impacted? Because it might be one person and then it reverberates throughout the group. And so there has been instances and we stop and we talk about it, or we check in with the person one-on-one. And so it's really about holding space for each other. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think it's really wonderful that y'all have talked about intergenerational learning and coming together as community to teach how to be around the water. The programming you do, Adriana, is amazing to see little young ones, out there learning that skill. And I know that Jessa, when we gather in our communities to do tomo practice, we always include the children as well. They're like part of the community. We never, tell them they're too little to do that, right? So I think it's beautiful. And I think that as we introduce our youth to the ocean and to sports and to the confidence of how to be with MoMA, the ocean, they're going to be a lot better off than we are, right? I know you all are better off than I was because of access. It's changing, so it's beautiful. And I would really like to allow you all to give us a little of your personal experience of actually, whether it's surfing or your tomo paddling or being on the water, what is like some amazing experiences you all have had out there?
You know what? I'll share right now about the fact that we were just in Aotearoa, in New Zealand, and it was nothing to do with paddling. I mean, I have so many stories, right? But this one scene that will just stick with me forever was I was out there with my son. It did start to rain while we were out there, but it felt just so good. It wasn't freezing. And I was able to feel safe enough to lie on my back and just float with my eyes closed and just feel the power of the ocean. And the stings of the little jellyfish, but but the magic in being able to connect with the ocean in that way, with my body being held by her body and us sharing that moment with one another of love. It was just so beautiful and just so powerful. And I'll share one more is whenever we do our crossing, by the time we get to the sunrise, because we always start in the early morning, so it's really dark, but by sunrise, the dolphins are usually just surrounding us by then. And it like never fails that whenever we're out on the tomo, like out deep in the ocean, the dolphins are always with us. And there's a whole nother story to that too, but it's just so beautiful. I popcorn to Jules.
I think I tend to always focus on Indigenous folks and the work that we do because there's an inherent responsibility there, occupying stolen Indigenous unceded land. And I'll just give maybe a couple brief points of another set of folks that we work with. Coastal Defenders has been a community partner with Black Surf Week at UCSD. And I was sharing with someone, I recently had an interaction where a person was, and I say this in quotation marks, making a joke about Black people and the water. And I think, Indigenous folks are not the only people who have been removed from their relationship with the water. And I'm really obsessed with this documentary called Wade in the Water. If y'all look it up, I think it's going to be available to everyone pretty soon. And it was a collective of these brilliant and amazing Black surfers throughout Southern California. And when I started a program, a Black Swim Initiative, where I went to undergrad on the East Coast at a PWI, and when that quote unquote joke was made, and it was actually right at Scripps, adjacent to one of the only Indigenous named MPAs, and this just happened like a couple weeks ago. And I said to them, that reminds me that I need to recommend this incredible documentary, Wade in the Water. And we showed it at Villanova, where I went to school on the East Coast. And when I had a student in the water, a young Black male, I held him in the water and I said, "You're safe, you're loved, and the water connects us to our ancestors and our rich African aquatic legacy." And he lifted his head up out of the water and said, "Coach, we have a rich African aquatic legacy." And you wouldn't know that from the way that surfing and other practices have really been colonized. So for me, I've always thought that I have a little bit more tangible and linear brain patterns. So for me, in my advocacy, I'm always looking to provide resources and context and visuals and audio and things that can really combat not only what we haven't learned, but unlearning the harmful things that we have learned.
I really appreciate this question, Tina. Thank you. And I don't know if you saw, but I immediately smiled because I think I'm flooded with all of these memories, right? And it just brings me so much joy because I could sit here for like another hour and tell you all these stories that I've had the opportunity. And so something that I often talk about being in program is there's a secondhand joy, right? And I think about like the first time that I see someone belly ride their surfboard in and the smile they have on their face, it's so, oh my God, I could cry. And it makes me think of two examples specifically, and one is really beautiful and it speaks about our programming. And so we had a youth who was in our program 2 summers ago, and they loved the ocean, like obsessed with the ocean, but from afar, their parent had shared with us. And this was the first time they were actually going to be in the ocean and surf. So there was a lot of nerves and hesitation. And then by the end of summer camp, their parent was like, "Oh my God." They like the youth couldn't stop talking every time they came back from summer camp. And now they're entering their second year as our youth leader. And it was so beautiful last fall. What we do with our youth when they enter the Rising Leader program is they join all of our volunteer training as a surf instructor. And so I think about this particular day because their mom had come to program as a participant, and the youth was facilitating our surf instruction. And so to see that, like the youth instruct and to share the wave, I have the picture on my phone. It's so beautiful to see Luca and their mom share a wave together, and they had never had that. It's such an honor to be a witness to that joy. And second one, it's most recent. I'm very grateful for the opportunity due to some unrestricted funding. It's not often, but thanks to the funder, I was able to coordinate a surf staff retreat in Costa Rica, that is led by Salty Afro Surf. And it is located in Puerto Viejo, which is one of the only Afro-Caribbean surf communities in the entire world. And the connection we had with the founders, they were a former Brown Girl Surf volunteer that had been living there and started it with locals and their family in the region. And so all 11 of us went there, and it was so special because Jules Jessica came, and that was our first time traveling outside of the country. And so there were so many firsts to be, again, a witness to, and the fact that like we do so much tending and holding space for other people to be in the ocean, that it was so special and unique for us as a team to share in that, being in the ocean together, to play with like, we don't have to think about work. This is not a meeting. This is, there's no notes that need to be taken. We can just be and play, and to also be, oh my God, surf legend Topo Hernandez, which is like, it was so much history, and to be in community in that way, and to have a team that is Afro-Caribbean Black surfers share that as well, which is very unique. It's could also have a whole other panel on the colonization of like the surf industry and the surf eco travel. But that was really, really special. And we were just talking about it today as a team, and just to see how in those 5 days, how much everyone in their own journey of surfing, it's a priceless memory that I will carry like probably for the rest of my life, to be and to share that with all of the team and our youth that are now, that were alumni of our program, and now they're my peers and their coworkers, and to have shared that with them is also really special.
So beautiful. I'm going to go to some of the questions from our listeners. And one of them was not a question, just a comment that they thank you for sharing your stories, your strength, and your heart. It's such a gift to listen and feel your words. I thought that was beautiful. But there is a question that they want to know what your favorite ways to teach the next generation to appreciate the ocean in appreciation of your culture and traditions. And so that kind of leads me to think about how safety around the ocean is huge. So I'm sure there's a lot of teachings that we have to give our youth, right? And something so basic that our tribe teaches is how water is life, but you have to respect that water, because that water can also take away your life. And so when we approach the water, we always approach with prayer. We offer a gift, we touch the water, we introduce the water to ourselves, and we touch and put some on our forehead. And we do that every time we approach a body of water. So if you can kind of jump into that question, if it appeals to you. What are ways that you teach the next generation to appreciate the ocean in appreciation of your culture and traditions?
I can jump in on that one. And for sure, it's storytelling and experience. When we get together out in the ocean, when we're paddling, while the adults are out paddling, the children are with community. And while that's happening, there's always storytelling, there's cultural sharing, and these children are learning about their own connection to the ocean, their ancestral ties to the ocean, and they're learning how to love the ocean, how to see the ocean as a relative, how to be with the ocean, and altogether how to eliminate any fears with the ocean. So for me, I think that's a blessing that we are able to come together and have, and I do foresee that continuing for generations and generations to come, because there's so many beautiful folks, Indigenous peoples and allies that are continuously fighting for these rights for these children to continue to thrive in their culture, to learn in their culture, and to participate in their culture. So I think those for the Chumash and the Tongva folks are definitely beautiful and powerful ways to connect these children.
I can jump in. The first thing that came to mind in hearing this question, like personally, is my favorite way. I think this is the way that we practice in Salted Roots as a community. Sorry, I'm just thinking how I want to phrase this. The first thing that came up for me is like, I don't think that I'm the one that's teaching. I think my favorite way to show up in program is by listening. I think there's so much as a former educator, and like my background in youth development is that I am always learning so much from the young people and even the children that I've been in space with. And so that is the way that I show up a lot in program and in community, because I'm not from California. And so there's so much learning, you know, from the kelp and the seaweed and I'm just thinking of all the stories, especially over summer camp, because we're with the youth over 4 days and how much I learned from them having grown up here in the East Bay and Oakland or other parts where they come from for summer camp. And so I think there's that piece. I'm learning so much from the youth that adds to the appreciation that I have. And also just thinking about our community, right? Like we are a community, an intergenerational community of girls, women, and gender expansive folks who share a common connection to the ocean. There's so much rich culture and traditions that comes to program and that is celebrated and welcomed. And that's like this beautiful melting pot, not in a way that it like becomes blurred, but it's all brought to the center, and those things are exemplified, whether it's on land or at the beach, and the food that we share as community, and the way that we celebrate, and our song and our dance and how we are a program. We're sharing together and teaching each other about our culture and our traditions, and that's what is making the Salted Roots community. You know, it's not just one overpowering the other. It's made up of so many different that we're sharing with each other.
Y'all, I'm gonna be super honest. I flipped to the next question, so I already somewhat forgot the first one because I replied. My computer was doing an update, and now these fancy things popped up, and it says I answered a question because I told someone, "Great question." They had a completely different topic. I don't know if you can see that under open, answered, or dismiss from Alexis Guerra.
Oh, no. Okay, I'll look at it. But did you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it was, what are your favorite ways to teach the next generation to appreciate the ocean in appreciation of your culture and traditions?
I think, and again, I'm just repeating myself, that I always am cognizant of when I'm on my homelands and when I'm not, but in the advanced preparation component, we do more of water story sharing before we even enter the water. So what we've been doing a lot is journaling, and I don't just mean journaling as verbal, because the older I get with coaching, you know, I don't raise my voice anymore. There's tons of things I don't have the capacity to do. I can't take around the stuff, and I have to have help. And so with that has come a different way that I coach and mentor the youth, and it's slowed me down a lot. And the beauty that's coming out with that is it's forced me to explore different ways that we communicate and prepare. So when I was younger, I was a part of a lot of surf camps and water things, and the focus was on popping up on the surfboard. And that's not important. That's kind of the opposite of what the point of this is actually relationship building. And it's also very ableist. And just exploring all the ways that things are problematic. It's been able to allow me to explore things that are more holistic in nature. And so by journaling, I don't just mean that we write things out, they can draw or express them creatively. And that's why I love the concept of adding A to STEM in terms of art. And I think that that's a really beautiful intersection of Indigenous philosophies and how we can express ourselves in advance of even going to the water. In front of one of the designated MPAs on Kumi Island, in front of Scripps, there's this beautiful mural that's faded now, but it happened after the Huntington Beach oil spill, and it looks to be like an Indigenous woman coming through the water with the oil surrounding her. And to me, that artwork is far more powerful than anything that I can talk about when I'm down at the beach. So in these different ways that my movement has been limited in the last year or so, it's really enabled me to be more inclusive in the ways that we talk and prepare youth, and to Adriana's and Jess's point, listen most importantly.
That's amazing, Jules. I just can imagine what it looks like, and it tells a huge story. And that kind of takes us to when we talk about safety, you know, it's not only respecting the water, it's not only how we feel from others around us, but the quality of the water, as you all are speaking of. You know, we have DDT barrels that have been thrown in our water systems. We have, you know, the oil and just so much that the plastic. So I'm sure that you all must have some concerns when you're in those waters, you know. So if you want to share anything around that, and then we'll also go to that question you mentioned.
I think that it's also who, and it also, I feel like, interrelates to that question in terms of access to resources to doing that testing, and where funding is going in terms of water quality, specifically what maybe the term would be bioaccumulation, specifically HAB, or harmful algal bloom, the red tides. I've really leaned into the interconnectivity to advocating for Indigenous-led land and water stewardship, and land and water stewardship reclamation comes with advocating for the laws, not only for accessible beach access, but for harvesting. And if we're going to harvest, then you have an inherent responsibility to be able to test the water. And with that inherent responsibility, then you comes into a discussion of how and where to test the water. And then you get into you open another door, and it's like these doors that just keep opening one after another, and you think you kind of have it somewhat figured out and can help, and then something other arises. And so that gets into the understanding of data sovereignty. And so there's really a lot of things to take into consideration when we talk about something as simple as water quality, and also understanding that when you live in these coastal areas, they're inherently tied into capitalistic systems and tourism, and it's never going to be widely reported on when there are these issues outside of it, when it becomes like incredibly disastrous and the news systems are forced to report on it. But yeah, just wanted to mention and uplift the fact that there are so many components that come into like the funding, the resource, the access to the spaces, and then also the equal valuation of knowledge systems into how observations are happening in the environment, and trusting that the people who have stewarded the land for thousands of years have just as much, if not more, understanding of their own environments as people that are just coming out in the last 20 years with some test tubes.
Anybody else want to answer around that? I know, Jessa, you've mentioned like when y'all are paddling, and there was a spill of oil years ago, and it's supposedly cleaned up, but yet when you're paddling, you can smell it. That water is touching you. So if you can kind of touch on that, of any concerns you have around the safety of the water.
Well, as people who are in the water firsthand, we've witnessed that when these oil corporations are claiming that the water is the water's safe, the water's clean, it's not true. And we'll be, you know, paddling in the ocean a little bit further out, and you'll actually see specks, and I'm talking not really specks, of oil just floating around you. And it really is disturbing, because there's no way of saying like, okay, spot of oil, like don't get on my oar and land on my face when I put my oar up, you know, into the sky, and the droplets of ocean water touch my face, you know, like you can't separate that. So it's very disturbing how these corporations get away with so much because of monetary. You know, they have the money to just shut people up and keep it pushing. It's greed is a danger to our coming generations in so many ways. One habit that we make of being out on the ocean is when we find trash, and we do find trash, those I forget what they're called, balloons that you know, the ones that big happy birthday balloons. Yeah, when we find those in the oceans, thank you. The ocean's waters, we pick them up. Any plastics that we find, we pick it up. It's just our unspoken rule, you know. We will paddle out of our way in another direction than we intended to go, just to ensure that we can clean the trash of others. And I don't think there's any other way to get around trash in the ocean other than actually eliminating plastics altogether, right? Like that whole idea of like 50 years ago, people were getting along just fine without plastic. And I think 50 years from now, we can do the same thing. We just have to eliminate the plastic right now. And as far as the oil spills and all of that go, I don't have the answer, because every time I complain about shutting it down, you hear people talk about how comfortable they are in their lifestyles. They don't want the health of the earth if it means they have to give up their cars and their airplane trips, and you know, so be it. But it all ties into the natural world, right? Remembering that we are a part of the natural world, and remembering how to be a part of the natural world. And so seeing these heartbreaking occurrences are a huge reminder that our children in modern day schooling, whether it be private schooling or public schooling, they're not getting the teachings of how to be natural, how to, as I talk with my fake eyelashes, no, how to be with the earth, you know, how to remember. We've forgotten how to remember. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just add around just like the water quality piece and the garbage and the trash that we see at the beach and in the water, right? A practice, a friend of mine, a surfer, she puts it in her wetsuit, like just being in the water, right? Like she'll paddle out and put it in her wetsuit, right? It's this without thinking, right? Like as a surfer, the way that when in our community, right? I don't want to speak for everyone else, because the way that I saw surfers growing up was very, you know, the 360s, the white, blonde hair, blue eyed. It's very competitive. And for us, the way that Salted Roots as a community, even among our team, we talk about it as it's a very spiritual practice, and the ocean is a very healing place for us. And so what is our responsibility to take care of it as the ocean takes care of us? And so how do we be in reciprocity with not only the ocean, but with the land? And so just to highlight is around inequities and environmental justice and injustices that do exist. You know, I was talking about the water quality, you know, and it, you know, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to go up and down the California coast, not throughout, but, you know, in the wealthy neighborhoods, in the wealthy parts, the beaches, you know, it's either they're privatized or they have the resources, they have the money in their city and their counties to clean up the beaches because they don't want to see that garbage on their beach, right? And then the public beaches, which are access, which in California, we have the Coastal Act of 1976, which ensures access to all people. It's not the case. You have poor water quality. You don't have the sufficient resources to keep the beaches clean. It's not a coincidence that it happens to be certain neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods. And I think that's the inequities that do exist. And I've seen it. And it's also, it's not just here in California, right? Like being from the East Coast, that also exists. The inequities and the lack of resources, and it happens to be the folks that are wealthy and have the power and the decision makers to make sure that the beach is kept nicer and cleaner for them, because they're beachfront and they don't want to see that, right? But they're not the ones that are out there caring for it. And I think the idea that is really interesting about American culture is it's the focus on the individual. What is their individual experience when they are at the beach and in the ocean, rather the collective? And what I've heard Jessa and we've shared, it's about being in relation, in community with the earth and the ocean, and that's not extended at that level, American culture and American society. So that's something that I sit with a lot, is the idea of individual versus collectivism, and just living in reciprocity with nature and all of its beings, you know, the ocean, the marine mammals and the kelp and the winged creatures, and on lands and all of that. It's all connected. I'm kind of rambling now because I'm just in deep philosophical mode about it, but yeah, that's what came up for me.
Thank you. Absolutely. All our relations, we don't separate it. So the question that you mentioned, Jules, that got sent over to answer, the question is, what actions can academic researchers take to respect Indigenous peoples and lands before deciding to collect environmental samples from the oceans, beaches, estuaries, etc., for science? Whoever wants to answer that.
I'll use Jules as the perfect example of, you know, not living on her ancestral homelands and understanding that she lives in Kumeyaay Islands. And so every chance she gets, she employs Kumeyaay people in some way, somehow, involves them. So I think first and foremost is employing Indigenous peoples and even creating works for them. For instance, having an Indigenous guide to show you how to reconnect while you go and get your samples, right? Like the proper way, and asking for permission to utilize these waters, you know, because this body of water, you know, is just that, a body. And you don't just go picking and poking at a woman and it not be molestation, right? So why then would we just think that we can just do whatever we want with the ocean? So I think having ways to utilize Indigenous teachings, but have these knowledge keepers get paid for their work and their time and their energy would be wonderful. And that's just a small amount, but I know we're running up on time, so I will pass the mic.
Thanks, Jessa. I try, but it's always trying. I can always do better. And Alexis, thank you for your question. I have a Dead Sea Scroll list of answers, but I know the time is approaching. I'm going to respect everyone's time. I think that this goes so much further than collecting samples. You know, it's the concept in totality of occupying other folks' land and how we need to defer to people. I always ask before I'm going to be on a panel, at minimum, is there California tribal representation? And if it's anything local, who have you talked to? Who is Kumeyaay before I do anything? Are they being paid? What is their compensation being offered? I love Climate Science Alliance's approach with the tribal working group, listening, putting that back into the hands of Indigenous folks to help guide and make these decisions. It's not about what we think. It's about the priorities of the nations who are here. I would say that it goes beyond academic researchers. There's environmental nonprofits that operate in a highly extractive fashion, and they go out there and even look, unpopular opinion on this particular platform that we're on today. A lot of people refer to things as MPAs. I don't really as much anymore. I refer to it as stolen Indigenous land. It's water first, it's ocean first, it's people first. Whatever designations happened in the last 20 years that came on top of the water, we have to inherently recognize that colonization caused these problems. And then we've got this really, really weird and odd thing happening between environmental nonprofits and academic researchers and institutions, where they then posit themselves as the experts to correct what they actually are responsible for creating. So this topic could go on, and I think that I would say that I inherently recognize that academic researchers are in a tough bind because we're trying to undo hundreds of years of harm in the tenure of a couple of years that you're on a project. They have their own restrictions, but think about what it's like to take a courageous stance as one person, and then think about what it's like to take two courageous stances. The next thing you know, you have a lab of folks, and actually just with those few people, you can empower each other to change the entire landscape of how we've been operating. It might be difficult to take that courageous first step, but that ripple of courage is going to inevitably produce results. And I would just encourage, again, everyone on the allyship that you can make these impacts and differences in every space that you occupy, where you consume, and as a consumer, your economic choices. There's so many ways you can get involved in addition to the academic research component. And you're going to have to go back to the basics, which is challenging because you have deadlines and things for your grants and for your institutions. But you have to start somewhere.
Thank you for that. And yeah, we only have a few more minutes. I really want to thank you all for contributing. This has been a really good talk. Adriana, do you have anything else you want to say before we disconnect?
No, just thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this conversation and to share a little bit about what our community Salted Roots is doing.
I appreciate you all. And I think on that last question too, it's really important to know that Native peoples look at all the elements and everything as our relatives. And so when you're talking about doing research, is it really going to be for the benefit of what you're researching? You know, is it going to cause an imbalance? You have to think about that, and not only asking the Indigenous peoples of the area, but asking the water itself if this is the right thing to do. So the last screen we have here is that we will be having another speaker series in April. You all are welcome to come and listen in as well. It'll be about BIPOC coastal experiences and coastal access. We're still working on getting all of our speakers, but right now we've got a couple that have committed. So I think it's going to be a really good one. And then in May, it'll be navigating the resources and pathways to access. So stay tuned, all of you listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and know that we appreciate that you are spending your time with us and to hear these beautiful speakers. You all are amazing, and I want to continue to follow what y'all are doing because it's all good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wanishi, thank you, Ms. Tina. Thank you, Jessa. Thank you, Adriana.
Very informative meeting.